Ani stared at the injured fox cub lying in front of her farmhouse. Its orange fur was dirty and one of its legs was bleeding. She knew her father wouldn't like having a wild animal near their chickens, but she couldn't leave it there to die. "Just this once," she whispered, picking up the small fox carefully. It didn't fight back, probably too weak from the injury. She carried it to their old barn and made a soft bed using hay and an old blanket. The fox cub opened its eyes slightly and looked at her. Ani noticed they were an unusual shade of gold, almost like honey in sunlight. "I'll call you Thunder," she said, "because I found you after the storm." She cleaned Thunder's wounded leg with water and wrapped it with a clean cloth. Her hands were steady. She had helped her father treat their farm animals many times before. Thunder stayed still, as if knowing Ani was trying to help. Every morning before school, Ani would sneak food and water to Thunder. She brought chicken pieces from dinner, some milk, and fresh water. Day by day, Thunder grew stronger. His legs started healing, and soon he could stand up on his own. But keeping Thunder a secret wasn't easy. Her father, Rohan, was always suspicious about why their chickens seemed more scared than usual. "There must be a fox nearby," he would say during dinner. "We need to be careful." Ani would just nod and eat quickly, feeling guilty about lying. But she knew her father. He would never understand why she was helping a fox. To him, foxes were just chicken stealers that needed to be kept away from the farm. One evening, while feeding Thunder, Ani heard footsteps approaching the barn. She quickly hid behind some hay bales, keeping Thunder close. It was her father, checking the barn before closing it for the night. Rohan walked around, moving things and checking corners. Thunder stayed completely quiet in Ani's arms, as if sensing the danger. Just when Ani thought they were safe, Thunder sneezed. Her father turned sharply toward their hiding spot. "Who's there?" he called out, holding up his flashlight. Ani knew she had to face him. Slowly she stood up, still holding Thunder. "It's me, Papa." The light from his flashlight fell on Thunder, and her father's face changed from surprise to anger. "A fox? You brought a fox to our farm?" He couldn't believe what he was seeing. "Have you lost your mind, Ani? It will kill our chickens." "No, Papa." Thunder was hurt. "I couldn't let him die," Ani tried to explain. "Look, he's not dangerous. He's just a baby." She held Thunder closer, who stayed calm in her arms. Her father watched them carefully. Thunder looked at Rohan with those golden eyes, not showing any fear. For a moment, no one moved. Finally, Rohan sighed. "Show me its injury," he said. Surprised, Ani gently showed him Thunder's leg. Her father examined it with experienced hands. "The wound is healing well," he admitted. "But Ani, you know we can't keep a wild animal. Once it's fully healed, it needs to go back to the forest." "But Papa," Ani started to protest. "No buts. A fox belongs in the wild, not on a farm. You can care for it until it heals, but then it must leave. Understand?" Ani nodded sadly. She knew her father was right, but the thought of letting Thunder go made her heart heavy. Over the next few weeks, Thunder grew stronger. He started walking normally, then running. Ani would watch him play in the barn, chasing mice and jumping over hay bales. Sometimes, she would bring him out at night when everyone was sleeping, letting him explore the farm under her watchful eye. Thunder never tried to go near the chicken coop, which surprised Ani. Instead, he would follow her around like a puppy, playing with fallen leaves or chasing his own tail. He seemed to understand that the farm was his temporary home, and he needed to behave. But Ani noticed changes in Thunder as he grew. He would often stare at the forest beyond their farm, his ears perking up at distant sounds. Sometimes at night, when wolves howled in the distance, Thunder would stand very still, listening. One morning, Ani went to the barn and found Thunder sitting at the entrance, looking toward the forest. He turned to look at her, and in his golden eyes, she saw something different. A wildness that hadn't been there before. She sat next to him, stroking his soft fur. "You want to go, don't you?" she asked quietly. Thunder leaned against her, like he always did, but kept looking at the forest. That evening, during dinner, her father asked, "How's Thunder's leg?" "It's completely healed," Ani replied, pushing her food around her plate. "Then it's time," he said gently. "Tomorrow morning, we'll take him to the forest." Ani couldn't sleep that night. She went to the barn and spent hours with Thunder, telling him stories and playing their favorite games one last time. Thunder seemed to sense something was different, staying extra close to her. As the sun rose the next morning, Ani and her father walked toward the forest, Thunder walking beside them without any leash. At the forest's edge, they stopped. Thunder took a few steps forward, then turned to look at Ani. "Go on," she whispered, trying not to cry. "This is your home now." Thunder walked back to her and pressed his nose against her hand one last time. Then, with graceful steps, he walked into the forest. At the treeline, he stopped and looked back once more, his golden eyes shining in the morning sun. Then he disappeared into the shadows of the trees. Ani felt her father's hand on her shoulder. "You did the right thing," he said. "Thunder belongs there." "Will he be okay?" she asked, wiping her eyes. "He's strong and smart, thanks to you. He'll be fine." Her father smiled. "Come on, let's go home. The chickens need feeding." As they walked back, Ani looked over her shoulder at the forest. She thought she saw a flash of orange fur between the trees, but it was gone so quickly she couldn't be sure. Deep down, she knew Thunder would be okay. He had taught her something important. Sometimes loving something means letting it go. That night, as Ani lay in bed, she heard a distant fox call from the forest. She smiled, knowing Thunder was out there, free and wild, exactly where he belonged. But a small part of her heart would always belong to the little fox who taught her about love, courage, and the true meaning of freedom. A year passed since Thunder left. Ani often thought about him, especially when she heard foxes calling at night. She wondered if any of those calls were from him, now grown and living his wild life in the forest. Life on the farm continued as usual. Ani helped her father with the animals, went to school, and spent her free time exploring the farmland. But she always kept an eye on the forest edge, hoping to catch a glimpse of golden eyes or orange fur. One cold morning, while collecting eggs from the chicken coop, Ani noticed something strange. The chickens were acting nervous, clucking loudly and moving around restlessly. She looked around carefully but saw nothing unusual. Then she spotted them, footprints in the mud near the coop. They weren't fox prints. These were bigger, deeper. Wolf prints. "Papa," she called out, her voice steady but worried. "You need to see this." Her father came quickly. He looked at the prints and frowned. "Wolves," he said. "They're getting bolder, coming this close to the farm." That night, they locked all the animals in their barns and coops extra carefully. Ani could hear wolves howling in the distance, closer than ever before. She thought about their sheep, chickens, and other animals, hoping they would be safe. Over the next few days, more signs of wolves appeared around the farm. Missing chickens, more tracks, and even scattered sheep wool near the forest edge. The other farmers in the valley were having similar problems. "The winter's been hard," Ani's father explained during dinner. "The wolves can't find enough food in the forest, so they're coming closer to farms." One evening, while Ani was helping her father fix a broken fence, they heard loud bleating from the sheep pen. They ran toward the sound, and in the dim light, they saw 3 wolves trying to break into the pen. The wolves were huge, their gray fur making them look like shadows come alive. The sheep were packed tightly together, bleeding in fear. Ani's father grabbed his rifle, but before he could use it, something unexpected happened. An orange blur shot out from the darkness, attacking the largest wolf. It was a fox, fighting with incredible speed and courage. Ani's heart jumped. She recognized those golden eyes. It was Thunder. Thunder was smaller than the wolves, but he was quick and smart. He darted between their legs, biting and jumping away before they could catch him. His attack surprised the wolves so much that they backed away from the sheep pen. Ani's father raised his rifle and fired a warning shot into the air. The loud noise, combined with Thunder's fierce defense, was too much for the wolves. They turned and ran back toward the forest. Thunder stood his ground until the wolves were gone. Then he turned to look at Ani and her father. He was bigger now, his orange fur thick and beautiful, his golden eyes as bright as ever. But he was still Thunder, the fox cub they had saved. "Thunder!" Ani called softly. "You came back." Thunder walked toward her slowly. He stopped a few feet away, looking at her with those intelligent eyes. He was no longer the playful cub she had raised, he was a wild fox, strong and free. But he had come back to help them. "I can't believe it," her father said quietly. "He remembered us. He protected our sheep." Thunder stayed at the edge of their farm that night, watching over the animals. Ani and her father went back to the house, but they kept checking through the windows. Thunder was always there, alert and guarding. The next morning, Thunder was gone, but Ani found fresh fox prints around all their animal pens. He had patrolled the entire farm during the night. This became a new pattern. Thunder would appear every few nights, checking on the farm. The wolves never came back. Perhaps they learned that this farm was protected. Other farms in the valley still had trouble with wolves, but not theirs. Ani's father changed his mind about foxes after that. Not all wild animals are enemies, he said. Some can be allies if we give them a chance. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, Thunder would come closer to the house. He never tried to come inside or act like a pet. He was wild and free, and that's how it should be. But he would sit at a distance, watching Ani as she did her chores, just like he used to do as a cub. One day, Ani spotted Thunder at the forest edge, but he wasn't alone. Another fox was with him, smaller, with reddish-brown fur. Thunder had found a mate. "Look, Papa." Ani pointed them out to her father. "Thunder has a family now." They watched as the two foxes disappeared into the forest together. Thunder had chosen to live wild and free, but he had also chosen to protect the humans who once saved him. Spring came, and with it, new life on the farm. The sheep had lambs, the chickens had chicks, and even Thunder's mate had cubs. Ani spotted them one evening, 4 tiny fox cubs playing near the forest edge, with Thunder and his mate watching carefully. "They're beautiful," Ani whispered to her father as they watched from a distance. The cubs had their mother's reddish-brown fur, but one of them had Thunder's golden eyes. Thunder was teaching his cubs about the farm. Ani would often see him showing them the boundaries, where they could and couldn't go. When one cub strayed too close to the chicken coop, Thunder quickly moved it back. He was teaching them to respect the farm, just as he did. The cubs grew quickly. They learned to hunt mice in the fields and catch rabbits in the long grass. But they never bothered the farm animals. Like their father, they became protectors instead of threats. One day, while collecting berries near the forest edge, Ani heard a strange sound. Following it, she found one of Thunder's cubs stuck in an old trap. It was the one with golden eyes, crying in pain and fear. Ani approached slowly, talking softly like she used to do with Thunder. The cub watched her with those familiar golden eyes, scared but not struggling. Just then, Thunder appeared. He looked at Ani, then at his trapped cub, and did something amazing. He walked over and nudged his cub, as if telling it to trust her. With Thunder watching, Ani carefully opened the trap. The cub's leg wasn't badly hurt, just scratched. As soon as it was free, it ran to Thunder, who checked it over before leading it back to the forest. That evening, Ani and her father went around their land, checking for more traps. They found 3 and removed them all. "No more traps on our farm," her father said. "The foxes are family now." Summer passed peacefully. Thunder's family became a common sight around the farm, always at a distance, but always watching. They kept away other predators and helped control the mice that would otherwise eat their grain. Other farmers started noticing how few problems Ani's farm had with predators. When they asked about their secret, Ani's father would smile and say, "We made friends with the forest instead of fighting it." One morning, Ani found something on their porch, a dead rabbit. It was Thunder's way of saying thank you, sharing his hunt with them like he would with his own family. After that, they would sometimes find gifts, rabbits, squirrels, or game birds, left neatly at their door. As Thunder's cubs grew older, they started their own families. Some moved deeper into the forest, but others stayed nearby. Each generation learned the same lesson. The farm was not for hunting, but for protecting. Years passed, and the story of Thunder's family became famous in the valley. People started calling their farm the Fox Farm, not because they raised foxes, but because foxes had chosen to protect it. Thunder grew old but remained strong. His golden eyes never lost their brightness, and he never stopped his nightly patrols. Even when his steps became slower, he would still check the farm boundaries, teaching younger foxes to do the same. One winter morning, Ani, now grown up, found Thunder resting under the same tree where she had first found him as an injured cub. He looked tired but peaceful. When she approached, he lifted his head and their eyes met one last time, the same golden eyes that had trusted her so many years ago. Thunder died that day, under his favorite tree. Ani and her father buried him there, marking the spot with a small stone. But his legacy lived on through his children and grandchildren, who continued to guard the farm. Now, when people ask Ani about the foxes on their farm, she tells them Thunder's story. She tells them how one act of kindness changed everything, how saving a small fox cub led to years of friendship between farm and forest. "The forest isn't our enemy," she always says. "If we show kindness, we might find friends in the most unexpected places." Even today, if you visit their farm, you might see foxes with golden eyes watching from the forest edge. They're Thunder's family, keeping his promise, protecting the farm that once protected him. And on quiet nights, when the moon is full, you might hear foxes calling to each other across the valley. The farmers there sleep peacefully, knowing that Thunder's children are still watching over them, proof that kindness can bridge the gap between wild and tame, creating something beautiful and rare, true friendship between forest and farm.